In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of texture. Now, we probably all know what texture is. There are tons of different words to describe it. Things can be soft or furry or bumpy or rough or a million other adjectives. The definition for texture is the way things feel or look like they might feel. There are two types of texture. There is real texture and implied texture. Real texture is when we can actually reach out and touch an object and describe how it feels. So if we were to reach out and touch the picture on the left, we would probably describe it as rough. If we were to reach out and touch the picture on the right, we might describe it as silky. I bet right now, you sitting at home, you can reach out and touch something and describe how it feels. Implied texture is sometimes called visual texture. That is when something looks like it feels. In both of these pictures, these are drawings. So if we were to reach out and touch the paper of this drawing, it would feel smooth because that's how paper feels. However, it looks like it feels bumpy, both for the toad and for the stones. You know, it looks to our brains like if we were to reach out and touch it, we would feel all of these bumps and ridges, and it would be a very uneven surface. That's because our brains know how to translate texture even when it really isn't there. We can use texture in artworks to create visual interest. One way that artists use texture is in something called Zentangle. Zentangle is a form of meditative doodling that has patterns, sometimes called tangles, put together to form a Zen tangle. So the word meditative means calming, and another word for calming is Zen. You can see in this image here, there are examples of different patterns or tangles, and people will draw these patterns and put them together in different ways to create a Zen tangle. There are a few basic textures that we can use to help build our Zentangle patterns. The first is called hatching. Hatching is when we have lines that are parallel to each other, repeated over and over and over again. A cool thing with hatching is we can create the feeling of light or dark based on how close or far apart the lines are. So in the picture on the right, we can see that the lines start further apart and the image looks lighter. And as we move to the right, the lines get closer and closer together and the image feels darker. Cross-hatching is when we have lines that cross each other. They usually cross at a right angle, and those overlaps create a different sort of texture. We can actually combine hatching and cross-hatching to create more feeling of light and dark, or value. So here in this image, on the left, we start with hatching. The lines all go in one direction and are parallel. And then we start adding in some cross-hatching where the lines intersect. And then at the end on the right, we add even more intersections so that the image appears even darker. Here is another example of creating different values by adding more and more intersections and overlapping. The key here is that the more lines they are, the more overlaps there are, and the closer together parts of the image are, the darker it will feel. The last basic building block is called stippling. Stippling is really simple. It's just dots made over and over and over and over and over again. Like with hatching and cross-hatching, the closer together your dots are, the darker your image will appear. So on the left, the dots are spaced further apart and it feels lighter. And as we move towards the right, the dots get progressively closer together. We can use these 3 types of texture, hatching, cross-hatching, and stippling, to help us create Zentangle patterns. But another way to create Zentangle patterns or texture is simply to repeat shapes and lines. We can see in these images here, they use the same shapes and combination of shapes over and over and simply rearrange them. So a good example is right here. We have this basic starburst pattern, and it's been repeated multiple times, and they've just switched it up by changing the size and the location. Here we have triangles, again repeated over and over. Here we have the same square spiral repeated over and over and over. Another thing we can do to help create a Zentangle texture is to fill in some areas, such as in this center texture. They've repeated circles over and over and changed the size, and the area around the circles has been filled in with black. In the texture next to it, some of these loops have been filled in to create a more interesting texture, and it also gives the appearance of a darker texture. For your assignment, you're going to create 5 different Zentangle textures using repeating shapes and lines. You have to create at least one texture that is light and one texture that is dark. So remember to think about how close together your lines and shapes are. Your textures should be made in squares that are about 1.5 to 2 inches large. When you're done, please take a picture of your textures and upload them to this assignment on Google Classroom.